Hi everyone, Ashton here, and welcome to Precision Horology. Today we have a very horologically interesting watch that we're going to be delving into. It's not a steel sports model Rolex, it's not a Omega Speedmaster, it's not a Patek Nautilus. It's something much more interesting in my opinion. It's the Patek Philippe 3573 Backwind with peripheral winding. Now, this watch is so interesting because it came out at a time in the 1970s during which Switzerland was going through its quartz crisis. Patek Philippe came out with this backwind movement, which means that the crown is on the back of the watch.
Well, for those of you that aren't familiar, a backwind basically means that the crown is on the back side of the watch, and we can see that crown here. The crown is used to wind the watch, and it's also used to set the time on the watch. We would wind it like so, like we would a normal crown that would be on the side of a watch, and we would lift the crown up to be able to set the time. Now, it's interesting, this gave Patek the freedom to experiment with interesting case shapes, interesting case sizes, and different things. And because the watch is automatic, it means that it doesn't hinder you too much when it comes to winding and setting the watch. If it were a manual wind watch, I personally don't think a backwind crown is a very good solution because it needs to be wound too often. But in this case, I think with an automatic watch, it works quite well. So here we have the watch uncased. We've successfully removed the dial and hands and taken the watch movement out of the case, and we can see what we're working with. Now, I mentioned at the outset that this watch was particularly horologically interesting, you could say. Now, why is that the case? We think of horologically interesting watches today, and the first things that perhaps come to the top of our mind would be steel sports model Rolexes. They seem to get all the press these days. They seem to dominate the talk over the internet, on forums, and on watch websites. Now, these are beautiful watches. These are popular watches that people enjoy wearing, and they command extremely high value today. But really, I wouldn't consider them horologically interesting. They are great watches. They are fantastic. I own a vintage Submariner myself. However, they don't possess the interesting aspect that this watch does. If we look at this watch, it appears at first glance to be a manual wind movement, but it is in fact an automatic watch, as we spoke about. It's a peripherally wound movement, which means the oscillating weight is on the outside of the movement. If traditionally we looked at a watch movement, we would see a oscillating weight taking up half of the back, or perhaps if we were looking at a micro rotor movement, we would see a small portion of the movement taken up by the micro rotor. But in this case, we don't see that. We see the peripheral oscillating weight here. Now, this peripheral oscillating weight is a ball bearing oscillating weight, and it moves around to wind the watch. Now, this is actually, I don't know a huge amount about early Patek Philippe backwinds, but I believe this was the first watch of its time to have a peripherally wound ball bearing oscillating weight like so. We have our wheel train here, which transfers our power from our oscillating weight to our ratchet wheel, which in turn winds up the mainspring inside the barrel. Here is where our barrel is situated, and our ratchet wheel is underneath the barrel. Traditionally, ratchet wheels are on top, but in this case, we have our ratchet wheel underneath, and that wheel train transfers the power out to our mainspring, which then delivers through the wheel train and then is regulated by our escapement and balance assembly. We can see that it's a ball bearing system, which works very well, very smoothly, and it's a very efficient automatic winding system. You would think perhaps it doesn't have the weight and the heft of a traditional oscillating weight, but it works extremely well with these highly manufactured ball bearings that we see here, and we can see them better if we point them out over here. Another incredibly interesting feature about this watch is the dial. We mentioned at the outset that it's an 18-karat gold dial with these beautiful blue indices or batten markers around the edge here that we can see. But really, the most interesting thing about this dial is what we see on the back. Traditionally, we would see 2 dial feet on the back of a dial, but here we can see that we actually have 3 dial feet. Now, dial feet are usually, or traditionally we could say again, screwed in from the side. A screw would be in the movement and it would clamp down as we screwed it in and secure those dial feet in place. Also, we could have dial feet that come through the movement and our screws could be on the movement side, which have a semicircular cutout. And as we unscrew the screw, they force pressure or exert pressure onto the dial feet, and that holds the dial in place. More modern watches, such as ETA examples, they will have actual clamps that can be pushed in that pivot and can hold the dial feet in place. We also have clip-on dials for certain models. But the Patek Philippe Backwind here that we have, it takes a rather different approach, a rather interesting approach. All those traditional methods would have 2 dial feet, or with the case of a clip-on, we wouldn't have any dial feet. But here we have 3 dial feet that actually have threaded ends on them. Now, these threaded ends, or these feet, I should say, sit into the watch movement, and the threaded ends have a nut that we can see here that actually screws on to the dial feet. Now, there is a female thread on the ends of these nuts and a male thread on the end of the dial feet. And we have a blued screw head, and these dial feet screw down, or these nuts screw down, and they clamp the dial in place. Now, unfortunately, one of the nuts is actually missing from this watch, so we'll have to see if one is available, or perhaps we will have to manufacture one if none are available. We also have some stripped threads on the end of our dial feet, so we can look at what we can do to repair these dial feet and make sure that we have the watch working exactly as it should and as intended. Well, with those initial examinations out of the way, we can take the watch to the timing machine and we can see how the watch is performing. We can see here that the watch is in the dial down position, and we have it reading 262 degrees of amplitude, losing 22 seconds per day. There we have our beat error, we have our lift angle, which is 48 degrees, which is well documented that we've found. And so we've set our input to 48 degrees there. If we couldn't find what our lift angle was, we would generally set it to 52 as a baseline, but there are also methods to find out exactly what the lift angle could be using visual inspections of amplitude, but we didn't need to do that here because the lift angle is well known. So we can see that the watch isn't performing terribly. The amplitude isn't a horrendous number. In fact, it's actually quite good. But we do have a bit of a loss. But again, that's just something that we can take care of when it comes to regulating. But just reading our amplitude, timing, and beat error in one position isn't really suitable or isn't really a substantial way to see how the watch is running. We really need to test out these things over multiple positions. So let's move the watch into the dial down position and see what kind of differences we have in our timekeeping. We need to allow a little time to settle our numbers, because when the watch is moved, things change, amplitude changes, timing changes. So we need to make sure that our watch has time to settle in this position. So we can see from preliminary results that we're losing less time. We have about a 10-second difference, we could say, in this position. And our amplitude looks fairly consistent. Now, perhaps we need to do a little bit of balance spring work, but we can see. We'll now move the watch into the hanging position, or the crown down position, as it would traditionally be known. Not on the backwind, because it's not crown down, but that's still what we would refer to the position as. Now, we can see an amplitude drop. This is nothing to be concerned about. An amplitude drop is normal. We expect amplitude drops. We would like to see an amplitude drop of around 30 degrees when we go from our horizontal to vertical positions. 40 degrees is acceptable, but 30 degrees is a better substitute, or a better number if we can get it to that. We can see that our timekeeping is relatively consistent in this position, and our amplitude starting to stabilize out. Now that we've received our initial timing results, we're ready to look at dismantling the movement and looking for any faults that need to be corrected. And once the movement is dismantled, we can correct those faults, order or manufacture any parts that we may need, and then we can get to assembling, lubricating, and performing precision adjustments for timekeeping of the movement. But before we do all that, we need to take one very important step. We need to release the power that is stored in the mainspring so that as we dismantle the movement, we don't release the power all at once and cause damage to any delicate components. So you'll see that I have attached the winding crown to the back of the watch. We would normally see the crown at the side here, but obviously it's on the back because the watch is a backwind. So what we need to do at this point is we need to remove the click spring to the side whilst we're applying pressure to the crown or unwinding the crown, as it were. If we just remove the click spring, we'll release the power too quickly. We can see here that those wheels are winding underneath, and as we turn the crown, we're transferring energy to the mainspring. Now, we need to move that click spring out of the way so that we can release the energy from the watch. We use our brass tweezers to remove the click out of the way, being careful so as to not damage any components as we let the power down out of the watch. We slowly release the power, and then the watch will eventually stop ticking as the power is released. With the movement back on the timing machine, we can see that there is still some residual power that mainspring has to release, but most of it has been released, as we note that our amplitude is 190 degrees in this position, down from 260. So we're very close to the watch stopping now. So stay tuned for part 2 of this video, where we'll look at the disassembly process and also any fault finding and repairing that we need to undertake or any parts that need to be manufactured. So thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be notified when the next video comes out. Feel free to leave a comment and share this with your friends. Thanks again, everyone, and see you next time.